Hi everyone, I'm April, and you're watching The Tangled Cat Speaks, and this one is a book edition. So, this one is interesting because I only had 3 books that I owned, and only one of those was a physical book for me to donate. So, I didn't do a whole lot of clearing out of my book stash as much as I would like. But that's okay. So let's go ahead and talk about what I did get to. I'm going to start with 2 audiobooks. These are both by Betty Hechtman, and they're series that are kind of ongoing. These are the most current of each of those series. So the first one is called One for the Hooks. This is a crochet mystery. These are all amateur sleuth, cozy mystery kind of things. So this one is One for the Hooks. And this one follows along with our amateur sleuth. She works in a yarn store, and there's a part of the, or not a yarn store, a bookstore, but there's a part of the bookstore that is dedicated to selling yarn. They have yarn, crochet, knit together kind of meetups there. And so this woman, she has a friend of a friend who is a realtor, and the realtor is trying to help a woman who's inherited this big house in a nice neighborhood, and is trying to help her set up the sale of, or not the sale, but the advertisement of this house, because the new owner is planning on making it into small apartments, and the neighbors don't like that. So there's a big conflict between the neighbors protesting and all kinds of things, and this woman and the realtor. And at some point the realtor turns up dead. So of course our amateur sleuth, the crochet person, she gets involved. It's fun, it's lighthearted. I really had a good time with it. It was a nice kind of story to have on in the background and just not have to think too hard about what's going on. Really enjoyed it. The other one is also by Betty Hechtman. Now this one is a mystery retreat. That's the whole theme of this cozy mystery. This one is the most current one, called Not a Game. Now this cozy mystery series follows a woman who used to be going to law school. She didn't like it, decided that she wanted to do something else, and she ended up taking odd jobs here and there. She's landed in this small town where she can bake from her home and take some of her baked goods to the local hotel and the local restaurant, and people just love her baked goods. In the meantime, the people at the hotel like her, or the owners of the hotel like her enough that she started a knitting, not a knitting, like a retreat kind of thing. I think one book was, there was like knitting going on, and another book there was, just different things as to why people would come to this small town and just get away. And the whole thing about this hotel is there's no internet, you can't have your cell phones, none of that. It's all, they call it unplugged. They do have a payphone if you absolutely need to use the phone, but they don't want any of the other kinds of things. So this particular one, called Not a Game, involves a retreat that she's started that was going to have to do with knitting, but she also wanted to include a murder mystery. What do you call it? Where, like, an interactive kind of thing where the guests have to figure out who the murderer was, and all the staff is in on it and that kind of thing. And of course, somewhere along the way, an actual murder takes place. Again, another really light-hearted kind of story, and it went by really fast. I really enjoyed it. It's just, I love cozy mysteries because it feels so relaxing to read them, because sometimes I read some of these heavy things and I'm just like, wow, I need a break. I want to go on a knitting retreat. So those were the two audios that I listened to. So let's go ahead and get to the one physical book that I own that I read. This is part of the June on the Range, a little kind of read along thing for the month of June that Michael K. Vaughan on his channel was talking about. And it was 4 Westerns. One was a Louis L'Amour, one was a Zane Grey, and then the other 2 were by any other authors. The last time I did my Louis L'Amour and one of the optional authors. This time is my Zane Grey and the other optional. So this one is one of the other optional authors. And this is called The Rounders by Max Evans. It's rather short. I got this at a free library, so it's kind of banged up, but that's okay. As long as I can read it and it's not falling apart, I'm happy. Now this one follows a couple of, they're called rounders, and they work for this man who owns this ranch, but the owner is not really a rancher himself. He's just the money behind it all, and so he doesn't really know the ins and outs of what the cowboys do, because they gotta break the horses and train the horses and all of this kinds of stuff. And he's got something in his brain that he wants it done a certain way, but the actual ranch hands are like, are you serious? So there's a little bit of conflict there. And it turns out that they end up having to break in a horse that they have named Old Fooler because he's tricky. This horse does not want to be trained. He pretends for a second that he's subdued a little, and then all of a sudden he just bucks somebody off, or he takes off running, dragging people with him. So they've called him Old Fooler. Now this book is very funny. There's a lot of humor in it, especially with the frustration that one of the ranch hands has towards Old Fooler. He's the one who's mostly handling the horse, so he's the one this is more like from his point of view. So he tries several times too, like he'll be sent on different things, like he has to go open up a corral that's been closed down for a little while for the season, so he has to go and check on some of the wild horses that are out there, all of this, and he takes Old Fooler. And it's just different encounters with people along the way on these different excursions. You know, he's always trying to get rid of this horse, and he doesn't care if he gets in trouble with the owner. He tries selling it, giving it away, and every time they bring this horse back to him because they're like, no, this horse is awful. But you know, it's funny. There's a lot of comedy, but it's also kind of brutal if you're not familiar, like I wasn't familiar with exactly how horses are broken. Because in my mind, I see that in old cowboy movies or whatever, that they have the horse saddled and they're riding this horse until the horse decides, fine, I'm not going to buck you off anymore. This goes into a little bit more of the brutal detail that goes into that, and so that was a little jarring for me. I still enjoyed the book, but yeah, I didn't like those bits, and there's not a whole lot of them. Mostly it was the horse attacking the guy. So it was a good story. I enjoyed it. It was a more modern Western. I want to say maybe in the 50s, I can't remember, but it's definitely more modern. It's not Old West Westerns. So that was the one that I owned. The other Western that I got to was an ebook that I do own on my Kindle. This is the Zane Grey book. It's called The Lone Star Ranger. This one follows a young man in his very early 20s, and he ends up, I think his father was no longer around, and it's him and his grandfather and his mother, maybe a brother, I can't remember. But anyway, so he's got kind of a chip on his shoulder a little bit. That prideful thing, if somebody challenges you to a duel, you can't say no. However, shooting another man is illegal. So he ends up in one of those situations where he's found himself in a gunfight with a guy, and everybody's like, oh, he's gonna die because this guy is crazy and he's gonna win. But he doesn't. This kid ends up shooting the other guy, dead. And so now he knows that even though he won that, the police are going to be coming for him, the sheriff or whatever. And so his grandfather tells him, you're going to have to leave, because if you go, they're either going to hang you or they're going to put you in prison for life. And so he takes off and he becomes an outlaw. But the problem with him being an outlaw is that he is generally a good person. He's a young kid. He's a nice guy. And most of the people that he comes along the way in his time being an outlaw, he helps them out. But he is also keeping an eye out for the sheriff and tries to stay out of trouble. But because he is technically an outlaw, he keeps running into other outlaws. And so he ends up in more gunfights, and he starts to get a reputation that he is one of the best shooters in the area. There's a notoriety about him. But it comes to pass that he is seen by a sheriff, and the sheriff also sees that he's a good kid and takes him under his wing and makes a ranger out of him. And so now he's on the other side of the law. But there are still people who are outlaws who remember him and want revenge for the people who have died when he had to shoot them. So he's having to juggle all of that. And it's a really good kind of coming of age story for this young man. And there's a little bit of romance in there, lots of shoot 'em ups happening. It's exciting, and I really had a good time with it. This was a little bit of a longer book. But I really, really liked it. So that was what I did for June on the Range. Let's see. So I did jump into the last book in the Dead Jack series that I was talking about last time. There was, it's a kind of like that old film noir detective kind of themed story, but it involves zombies and other supernatural type creatures. There was one book left, and this one I did on ebook. The other two I listened to the audios. This was ebook, and it was really short, but it was so fun. I enjoyed it. It's just hilarious, these shenanigans that this zombie gets into. This last one was called Dead Jack and the Old Gods. It's by James Aquilone. And I've seen it listed as a horror, but it's more urban fantasy, if you ask me. But because even though there were scary creatures, I wasn't scared. It was just hilarious all the way through. So the zombie guy and his cohorts are trying to stop the end of the world, because there are some people who are trying to bring back the old gods, one of which is Cthulhu. So there's this big old to-dos going on. People are trying to, there's a book that they're trying to get, the Necronomicon. And if the bad guys get a hold of this Necronomicon book, they'll be able to bring back the old gods, and Cthulhu will ruin everything. And so there's a lot of things that happen, and it's hilarious and it's silly, and it was just a fantastic ride. It was definitely, if I had been told what this series was about, I never would have read it. But because I kind of stumbled upon them by accident, and they were kind of short, and I just needed to take up some time before I got back to some of my bigger books, I stumbled upon it and it came out. Super pleased with it. It's not the best writing. It's not even the best plot lines, but the characters are hilarious, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So Dead Jack and the Old Gods. Let's see. So what else did I get into? 2 science fiction short stories that I got off of Kindle. It was under the Prime Reading. So Prime Reading if you have Prime, then you can borrow books kind of like you would from your library. Um, you don't buy them, you don't keep them. Once you're done reading them, you put them back in the rotation or whatever, and you can get more to borrow. And there was this little set of 6 short stories that are all sci-fi. Different, each one is a different author. And I went ahead and picked those up. And the first one that I got was literally only 45 pages long. This is by Veronica Roth, and the book was called Ark. Now, this one was about Earth's last days, literally the last days. There was an asteroid or a meteor or something that's about to hit the planet, and it's going to take out the whole planet. There's no hope of escaping that, or of diverting that, or whatever. So people have been put on these arcs. There's one arc left. There was in the last, and this is coming for years. This is years. They know this is happening. There's no getting away from it. So they've been slowly transporting people to these arcs and hopefully finding a different place for humanity to live. And in the meantime, over these years of this impending doom, a whole bunch of scientists have been taken to this remote place, and they're cataloging life. They've got seeds from many different plants. They've got DNA from many different creatures, species, all of that. So that hopefully if they find a place somewhere else out in the universe, they can repopulate it with the things that we're familiar with here on Earth. It's a really short story. It's really interesting. I very much enjoyed that. The other sci-fi that I read out of that was called Summer Frost, and this was by Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch was the whole reason why I even stumbled upon this little set of short stories, because I'm going through all of Blake Crouch's bibliography. Now, this one is called Summer Frost, and this was only 75 pages. And this one follows a game developer, and she ends up, for whatever reason, realizes that one of the characters in this particular game is doing something that it wasn't programmed to do. So she starts trying to figure out what is happening. As you can kind of foresee, there's going to be some issues with that. So it was a really fun story. I really, really liked that. Yeah, I found that really, really exciting. So I'm excited to get to the other 4 in that little bundle of short ebooks. The book that I read was Snowbound, also by Blake Crouch, since I'm going through his whole thing. Now, this one I didn't care for quite as much. This is more of a thriller. It's not horror or sci-fi or anything. This is more of a thriller. And what it is, it starts off with a woman who works in a clinic. She works at night. She's driving home. She ends up having to pull over because her tire is going flat, I believe. And then she gets snatched in the dark. She gets taken away, and nobody knows what happened to her. There's never any ransom. There's no body ever found. They found her vehicle, but they don't know where she went. And of course, the first place they look is the husband. And the husband's like, no, this was not me. And he starts to panic. So he takes his young daughter, and they go basically on the run and start moving from city to city until people start to try to get a little bit too close, and then they take off again and start again somewhere else. And at some point, an FBI agent makes contact with him, which terrifies him because he's like, how did they find me? And so now he's like getting ready to go on the run again, but the FBI agent says, no, we don't want to, I believe you. We believe you didn't do it, but we need your help in catching the people who did this, because your wife wasn't the only one that went missing. So it ends up being this whole trying to catch people who are snatching women up right off the street. Very interesting story. but I didn't like it quite as much. And literally, it's called Snowbound, but there was no snows to be seen until like more than halfway through the book. And I totally forgot that this was even called Snowbound as I was reading it. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's the snow. But it was just kind of a, I don't know, it was a little bit far-fetched for me. There was just a whole lot of things that I just didn't feel they were believable. It was an interesting story and I didn't hate it. It was enjoyable, but I've read better from this author, so yeah, it wasn't quite as good. But that's about it that I've read the last couple of weeks. I thank you for spending a little bit of time with me, and I'll talk to you again later. Bye-bye.